Good morning, children. Welcome to the English session. Today, we shall deal with the first chapter from the textbook Hornbill, The Portrait of a Lady by Khushwant Singh. The story, The Portrait of a Lady, depicts the bond of the familial relationship between a grandmother and her son. The grandson lives with his grandmother in their village house. Life in village. His parents have moved to the city, and for the time being, he is under the guardianship of his widowed grandmother. She is a pious and beautiful woman, even though she has grown old and wrinkly. She moves slowly with slumped shoulders, but is in a constant mode of spiritual and religious enchantment. This gives her an air of calmness that the author likens to that of snow capped peaks under the winter sun. The author studies in a school attached to a temple complex, so the grandmother escorts him to it. There, the priest teaches the children the alphabet and morning prayers. The grandmother sits inside the temple and spends her time in religious devotion until he finishes his school day. In the evening, they both return home and feed stray dogs with stale rotis on their way. Change in lifestyle. The daily routine is finally disrupted when they both are relocated to the city where the author's parents reside. The settling in period in the big city brings its own set of forces for both the grandson and his grandmother. Even though they share the same room, they grow apart gradually. His grandmother no longer went to school with him. The author is enrolled in an English medium school where he learns science and mathematics in place of religion and spirituality. She felt sad that there was no teaching about God and the scriptures at the new school. He also starts taking interest in music, which is a taboo for the austere grandmother. To her, music had levied associations. It was good only for prostitutes and beggars. She fills her time in spiritual endeavors and tending to the sparrows that visit their city house. She breaks the bread into little bits and throws them to the sparrows. Some come near her and sit on her legs. The others perch on her shoulders. She never drives them away. Feeding the sparrows is the happiest half hour of the day for her. Growing separation. The grandson then moves to university and is given a separate room for privacy and independence. This alienates the two further. The grandmother accepts her loneliness quietly. She busies herself with her spinning wheel. She talks rarely. As the time goes by, the author decides to move abroad for higher studies. His stay would last 5 years, so he assumes that it would be the last time he would get to see his grandmother, who was not getting any younger. She goes to see him off to the railway station and they say their warm goodbyes. When the author returns home, 5 years down the line, he is pleasantly surprised to see his grandmother lead the welcoming party. Back at home, she keeps busy with her sparrows but arranges a celebratory function for the returning grandson. She, along with other women folk from the vicinity, partakes in festive song and dance to rejoice the return of her grandson. They persuade her to stop as singing and beating of the drum could make her tired. They persuade her to stop as singing and beating of the drum could make her tired. For the first time, she forgets to pray. The grandmother's death. However, the festivities do not last long, as the very next day the grandmother falls sick. Even though the doctor dispels fears of serious illness, she could feel a nearing demise. She asks to be left alone and devotes herself to prayer and appreciation of God. Suddenly, her rosary drops to the floor as her soul departs to the heavens. The funeral is arranged and has some special guests in the form of her beloved sparrows that gather around the house in a poetic procession for the dearly departed. They did not chirrup. The narrator's mother brought bread and broke it into little crumbs. She threw those crumbs to them. The birds took no notice of them. As the body of the grandmother leaves the house, so do the sparrows, untying another string of love, care, and familial concern. The gist of the story. The story is about the author and his grandmother. The grandmother was an old woman with a wrinkled face. The author had always seen her like this for the past 20 years. She appeared to be so old that he could not imagine her being young and pretty, someone who had a husband. She was short, fat, and slightly bent. The author had seen his grandfather's portrait, an old man with a turban and a long white beard covering his chest. To the author, his grandfather didn't seem like a man who could have a wife and children, but someone who could have lots of grandchildren. His grandmother used to move around the house in spotless white with her one hand resting on her waist and her other hand counting the beads of a rosary. In the initial days, the author and his grandmother had a good relationship. She used to wake him up and get him ready for school. She used to pack the things required by him for the day and walked him to school every day. She used to visit the temple that was attached to the school. She had a routine of reading the scriptures. The author, along with the other children, sat on the veranda singing alphabets and morning prayers. They both used to come back home together with stray dogs roaming around them as his grandmother would carry the stale rotis to feed them. Soon, the parents of the author, who went to the city to settle in, had called them. As they reached the city, his relationship with his grandmother took a turn. Though they shared the room, their bond grew apart. He started going to an English medium school. She no longer accompanied him to his school, and there were no longer stray dogs who roamed around them while walking back home. She, however, used to ask him about his day and what he had learned. She didn't understand anything, as everything was in another language which she could not understand. She didn't approve of the new syllabus that he was studying because she thought that they did not teach him about God and scriptures. They saw less of each other. As the days passed, he grew older and soon went to the university. He had his own room, and this made their relationship sour. She stopped talking to everyone and spent her whole day sitting at her spinning wheel, reciting prayers and moving beads of the rosary with one hand. However, she loved feeding sparrows on the veranda at dawn. Breaking bread into pieces and feeding it to the birds were her daily routine. The birds would sit on her legs, her head, some even on the shoulders. Soon the author decided to go abroad for further studies. She came to the railway station to leave him off. She was not sentimental, continuously recited her prayers, her mind lost in the prayers, and she kissed him on the forehead. After 5 years, as he returned home, she was there to pick him up at the station. She was still the same as she had been 5 years ago. She clasped him with her arms and didn't say a word. She still used to feed her sparrows. One day, she didn't recite her prayers, but instead collected the women of the neighborhood, got a drum, and started singing. The next day, she was ill with mild fever. The doctor said that there was nothing to worry about, but she was sure that her end was near. She didn't want to waste her time talking to anyone in the family anymore, but spent her last hours in reciting her prayers laying on the bed. She died, and so her body lay on the bed lifeless. As they prepared for her funeral, they saw all the sparrows sitting in the veranda around her, mourning her death. Thus, we have come to the end of the session. Thank you, and have a nice day.